the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
How's your review?
We're good.
You good?
Yeah,
You see?
We're good.
Okay, good. Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver. Okay?
baby,
Don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Procter & Gamble released a short video in the last 20 days entitled The Talk. It is not an advertisement for any P&G product. It is meant to be provocative, to get Americans talking about the way our biases around race operate on a very human level. The piece runs 2 minutes. Let's take a look.
Who said that?
The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
Listen, it's an ugly, nasty word, and you are going to hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not going to let that word hurt you. You hear me?
There are some people who think you don't deserve the same privileges just because of what you look like. It's not fair. It's not.
Remember, you can do anything they can. The difference is you gotta work twice as hard and be twice as smart.
Come straight home after practice. You got your ID? Oh, guess I stopped you.
How's your review?
We're good.
You good?
Yeah,
You see?
We're good.
Okay, good. Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver. Okay?
baby,
Don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay.
It's not fair. But you keep showing up.
You are not pretty for a black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
I am joined now by 3 people with perspectives about The Talk. Not just the video, but the talks they have had as children and as parents. Kristine Decker is the marketing director for P&G North America. Ms. Decker has been with P&G since 2009. She now oversees a $2 billion media budget to support North American brands. Marcus Coleman is a Cincinnati attorney in private practice. He grew up here and is preparing to send his daughter off to college this coming week. And Ashlee Young, who works for Interact for Health, where she coordinates evaluation of the impact grants made by Interact. Ms. Young is active with the Urban League and has a high school age daughter who's going to be starting high school next week. Yes. So all these transitions going on at the same time, which are all exciting and frightening for other reasons. So thank you for being here this morning.
Absolutely.
Kristine, let's start with you. What's the motivation? Why would P&G want to produce something like this? It's not an advertisement for, there's no product placement here.
Right.
What's the motivation?
So we started the My Black is Beautiful program about 10 years ago. It's actually started by a group of employees that felt like there was an opportunity to better connect with African American women online, and we also had some conversations that we wanted to start. When we started 10 years ago, the focus was on bias as well, but around the beauty industry. If you think back 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of imagery around black women as part of the beauty industry, and we really wanted to start that conversation while we formed this community. And we've been listening for the last 10 years and really trying to evolve that conversation. And as we spent time with our consumers, as we spent time listening, we realized there was even more things that were important to them and even more conversations to have. And we discovered the insight around the talk in talking with our consumers, and this concept that every parent has the talk around the birds and bees, but African American parents, and in this particular spot talking about African American women and moms, have the talk about race and what's it like to grow up black, and when will you experience potential things, and how to keep your kids strong and resilient and still going through that moment. So this is a reflection of that insight, and the idea that this talk has been happening generation after generation after generation, and it hasn't improved. So we wanted to create this, to create dialogue, and to have the broader community, not only the black community, but the broader community, become aware and be part of the solution and be part of the conversation.
The distribution here, how has it been released? It's not a 30-second commercial.
Right, right.
It is not a feature-length film for the theater.
Right.
What is this, and how's it get out?
We started with a very limited airing of a 60-second version. We have a 2-minute that you just showed as well, and more to just understand reactions, and it went viral. It's been 20 days, and we're up to 10 million people seeing it and sharing it, and a lot of conversation, as you've probably seen. So it's really been an online effort so far, and very organic, with people just talking and sharing, and lots of different conversation, which is what we wanted.
So lots of response.
Lots of response, yeah.
Yeah. Marcus, as you watch this, what resonates with you?
One of the things that probably struck me was the parent in the car with the child. My daughter being 17, we've been doing this recently, and we have this talk, we have this conversation. What I think people have to understand is this is really about physical, mental, and emotional safety, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to prepare our children for some of the challenges that they'll encounter. So it's tough. It's tough to take them from a world where you want them to treat everyone with this kind of rainbow halo thing hanging around their heads, but at some point you transition into telling them that, hey, everyone's not going to approach you that way, and you have to be prepared for that.
Was the talk that you've been having with your daughter recently, over the past year or whatever, when she's, I guess, starting to drive, that's your reference there, was that one of many talks you've had with your daughter?
Oh, absolutely.
About this?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things, I don't know when this changed, but I can say it's been within the past 5, maybe 7 years or so. If you walked into a supermarket, at one point, there was an aisle and it said beauty products, and there were all these cosmetics and things and hair care products, and there was a separate aisle, sometimes next to it, African American. And I don't know if everyone noticed this the way that I noticed it. I'm sure I'm not the only person of color who noticed this. But the image that's sent is that the beautiful people, you go here. African Americans, you get your products here. And so these subtle messages, which our daughters see and hear, these are things that we have to counteract. And that's exactly what the talk is about. I was very impressed that Procter & Gamble did this.
Ashlee, how about you? On just a basic level, what was your response to this?
So after watching the video, I was hurt, but also I was excited for other people. It was kind of like my living room was opened up to the world, and really people gaining an understanding of some of the conversations that happen within the Black community. So some of those conversations I've had with my daughter, and having raised my brother after our parents passed away and sending him off to college, some of the conversations I've had to have with him recently. And so it really resonated with me, but I think it's also sad that in 2017, we continue to have those kind of conversations.
Do you remember having these kinds of conversations? I don't know when your parents died. You said your parents died, but if not with your parents, maybe with aunts and uncles, or do you remember having these yourself?
Yes. Yes, I definitely remember my mom having these conversations, and also my mom always being our advocate and always encouraging us that you do have to be better.
Well, that was sort of that scene about sending the daughter off to camp.
Yes.
And, you know, hanging back because unsure getting on that bus whether she fit in, and that line of you just have to be twice as smart and twice as energetic, or I forget what exactly the phrase is, but that sounds
it's very similar.
Marcus, how about you? I think maybe with the added twist of African American male youth, maybe even more in a more vulnerable situation.
Right.
Do you remember having these conversations, and how did you feel about them when adults wanted to have these with you?
It was an added pressure. It felt as if someone tossed something extra in my backpack before I'm walking out the door on my way to school. Nervous, but understanding that it comes from a place of love when people are telling you these kinds of things. I think that it's bad parenting to do otherwise. You know, we teach our kids to live in the world that we expect them to live in. And unfortunately, we have to understand that this is still out there and our kids are going to have to endure this and encounter it. And so, again, it's just substandard parenting not to have the conversation with your children.
Do parents in the African American community talk with each other about how to have these conversations? Kristine, anybody?
Yes. Sorry. We heard a lot. Yes. Yeah, I mean, and having grown up, my father's black and my mother's Polish, and so my reality was a little bit of that too, but looking different. You know, my experience was different than my brother's and things like that. So having that as a personal experience, but listening for the last few years and just talking to our consumers and our community, it's a village to some extent too on how do you help each other have that conversation. How do you not break a spirit, but be responsible on having them ready for the world. And that's a tough call, and I think there's a lot of remembering the moment when you had to have that discussion and the reaction of your child and how they almost had to grow up overnight a little bit. And that's a hard thing, but I think you're right, it's a responsibility too. It's preparing them for the world. Yes. And then, you know, I think what our hope is that we prepare more people to understand the situation and be empathetic and be part of the conversation and part of the change. So we wanted to highlight it in a way that we could hopefully create dialogue and change, but it's a reality folks are living through.
Ashlee, you were about to jump in on that too.
Yeah, because I definitely, especially with my mother being deceased now, you know, I have a village of women that I go to, and I ask for advice on how do you, and especially you look in the news and just various situations that we've endured the last few years, like how do I have these conversations? How do I be real and honest, but still allow my daughter to form her own opinions? And that's my struggle. And also, how do I educate her about history? Because I think a lot of times we don't understand our history and the important role that it plays in what we're experiencing today. And so I definitely call on a group of women to advise me on how do you have these conversations and how do I steer her in the right direction.
This is entitled The Talk, but as I was thinking about this, I'm sure there are many, many talks over the course of years. And for you as parents, what triggers a moment where you feel like you need to have a talk? Not the talk, but a talk. Is it something that's going on inside you or something that you see your children experience and then you want to help them understand that, contextualize that? What sort of triggers when these happen?
An encounter. I think that I raised two nephews, my nephews Michael and Demetrius, and typically an encounter, something that your child tells you about which they can't explain because their worldview is much more restricted than the one that the parent has, and that's what kind of leads to it. And you kind of ease them into this conversation because you don't want them to think everyone who doesn't look like you is going to mistreat you. You definitely don't want to give them that belief because it just isn't true. But you do want to make sure they understand that there's some other elements out there. And sometimes there's no rationale for how you were treated, but I can't promise you it's not going to happen again.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely an encounter. My daughter had an encounter earlier in her school years of someone saying, you know, my grandparents said I shouldn't play with black people, but you're different, and so I can play with you. And so that was an encounter of having to have a conversation of why, and this was in elementary school. And so I think encounters, and then also just things that happen in the world. So I think the older kids get in, the more they're exposed, even now because of social media, they're exposed so much at an earlier age that you have to have, it's almost continuous talks and conversations because there's so much happening in the world that you have to sit down and talk with your child about so that they can get your perspective and not get everyone else's.
For both, Ashlee, for both you and Marcus, where you have daughters about to make big changes, going to high school, going to college. Has this increased the need? Yeah, I know.
No reminder right now.
No reminder right now. Increase the need to have and think about what you're going to be saying?
Absolutely, and in fact, one of the things that it forced me to do was to look at intersectionality, because I can speak from a perspective, and we were talking before about your networks. With my nephews, it was pretty easy for me to at least foresee what they would encounter, but I've never been a girl. And so I had to reach out to friends in my network who were women to get some advice on how to help her out with this, and now she's become a young lady. It's not just how someone will respond to you as a black person, but she's also a young woman. And so there's something else there, there's an added layer there that I have to help her to prepare for, which causes me to have to learn some things about myself and about how the world sees women, and then specifically black women. You know, so it gets more complicated.
I would ditto. I'm glad you brought up intersectionality, because I think that's something, even for myself, I think I always see myself as being a black person. And here recently, like, I'm a black woman, and I experience different things because I am not only a woman, but a black woman at that. And to your point, you know, as my daughter enters high school, you know, these are pivotal times of preparing her for college. And so, you know, we've had several conversations about, you know, really doing well so that you'll get into college. Sometimes your teachers might not believe in you, but I believe in you, and I know that you can do this work. And that is a continued conversation of really just boosting her self-esteem, so that way she knows that she is great, and that she's amazing, and that she can do anything that she wants to do.
Which fits into your larger campaign about young girls, and we're going to talk about the website here eventually, which you can go from this video to a lot of other things that P&G's been working on. What's it called? What's it like to be a girl?
We have, like a girl from
like
our
a girl,
Always brand.
Which I found really interesting too.
It's done a great job making that a positive term now, because it definitely wasn't in the past.
No, it's not.
Okay, I'm going to ask everybody to stay right where you are.
Okay.
But we need to take a break. So stay tuned. We're going to keep everybody here, and we're going to continue to talk about this, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. This is very good. I do know. Welcome back. We're talking this morning about The Talk, which is a video that has been put out by Procter & Gamble. And I am joined this morning by Kristine Decker, who is with Procter & Gamble and oversees the production of pieces like this, Marcus Coleman, who's an attorney in town, and Ashlee Young, who is, maybe most importantly in this situation, a mother. So I want to not let something go. You said your father is African American, your mother was Polish. Did I get that correct? So, you know, some people would say technically mixed race, but I am sure that other people would say, oh, you're African American, or, you know,
lots of terms.
that confusion in terms. And this is increasingly a reality in our society that touches many families, including mine.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering how The Talk relates to that.
From my personal background?
Yeah.
It was part of my life growing up too. I think seeing my father as an African American man experiencing the world different. My brother looks darker than me. I look, I think, Italian or Hispanic sometimes to people. I'm very confusing. So I think, you know, growing up, I had the ability to see a lot of different things, being part of different communities and being aware of those dynamics, and then having children as well.
How people saw you in any one particular situation, I think, is kind of interesting. So we've talked in very positive terms up to this point in the discussions that have started. There have been negative reactions to this piece. People who just find it inappropriate for a corporation to have done this. People who are saying that there's some anti-police elements to this. There's a variety of responses. What do you think, how do you react to those responses?
Well, from stepping back from a P&G standpoint, we're all about equality. So if you think about the history we've had. We've talked about gender equality, LGBT equality. This is our first forum into race, which we knew was going to be a tougher topic. We respect all points of view. That's part of why we wanted to create a dialogue. So we're seeing positive reactions, we're seeing counterpoints. We really wanted to create dialogue because that's how you get to change. So we're in the process of just listening to consumers, trying to get constructive conversation, and our hope is that with this point of view, and this is one aspect of life, right? This is an African-American mom, that people take the time to try to just understand her point of view. And with understanding comes dialogue, and eventually comes change. And then with equality, I think all boats rise.
One thing that did strike me about the video is these are all discussions with African-American mothers and children. Men appear, but they never say anything. Why?
We just started with the point of view of mom, but we definitely have efforts coming to talk about the black male point of view and other points of view actually across the company. There's so many forms of bias. We think it's human nature, honestly, to have bias. So there'll be different conversations, and as we think about the journey of equality, you'll see different points of view. And from My Black is Beautiful, you will see the point of view of black men and black fathers over time. We just wanted to start somewhere, and we started with mothers.
Raises also the question in my mind of, and I don't just want Kristine responding to this, but what would you like to see? And here's something that's out there now in our culture and trying to create discussion, that's its intention. What would you like to see happen between African Americans and people who are white around this topic, and what could happen that might be fruitful in that area?
I think they want to, if you're going to first start with the premise that we recognize the basic humanity of other people, I think that we can then understand that the same thing that I want for my children is what someone of a different race would want for their children. So I look at it this way: if you're raising a daughter of any race, and in raising that child, you're not talking about the possibility of sexual assault. It's just substandard parenting. You can't do it. If you're a Jewish person who's raising your child and you're not talking about the possibility of them encountering anti-Semitism, it's substandard parenting. If you're a Muslim and you're raising a child and you're not talking about the ways that someone will treat that child because of their faith, it's substandard parenting. The basic humanity that I believe I have allows me to recognize that in someone else. If we start from that common denominator, I think the conversation gets easier.
Very interesting. Is this a discussion that you've ever found yourself in with, say, white parents in your daughter's classroom?
Probably not in the school setting, but I would say with other friends having the conversation, because it is a different experience. And I think, you know, what this video allows is for that dialogue to happen. So one, just recognizing that this is real perspective. So it's not, I mean, it's a video with actors in it, but this is a reality for many Black people. And so I think this opens the door to have the conversation around this reality and what do we do together to try to change this reality. Like, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think that there's an opportunity for us to work together to really raise this conversation and then look to our personal selves. Like you mentioned before, everyone has biases. It's how you act on them, or just really changing our mental models to acknowledge that I have a bias. How do I react to this? And so I think we can have continued conversation and holding each other accountable so that we can start to change the systems that have been in place that continue to perpetuate these things.
Is the company interested in, you've tossed this out there, is the company interested in actively creating these kinds of discussions in the community?
Absolutely. We obviously are trying the dialogue from an online community standpoint. We're doing a lot of that right now, but we're in discussions too around some community level conversations, and I know with the Freedom Center is one of the ones that we're really interested in having forums for dialogue. So we won't get to change until we all come together and try to see each other's points of view and try to get to a common place that we're just trying to get society to a better place, but also hear each other. So
I
having
think we all
an opportunity
agree with
for that.
The problem is, how do we get people in the same room who are willing to hear each other but don't all start from the same place at the beginning?
You know, the packaging I think is very important, because the term we've used many times is bias. It tends to be packaged in racism. and no one's going to ever wear that shirt. And so if we are willing to come in, and you have to be honest about your own biases. A very quick example, I was walking into a gas station one day getting out of my car, and as I'm approaching that gas station, I look up and I see a kid's black, he's about 15 years old, and I think to myself, wow, I forgot to lock my car. This is me.
Yeah.
I'm a black man, and I thought that. Now, if he were a white kid, would I thought that? I don't know, it's an unknowable. But I absolutely thought that, and it may have been triggered by the fact that he's a black kid standing there. And if I can be honest about that, that should free others to do the same.
Unfortunately, I'm out of time. Thank you, all three. Wonderful discussion this morning. Great piece. And I think we're going to keep this going. So, if you want to explore this topic further, you can join the My Black is Beautiful community. You just Google it. From there, you can branch out into other P&G efforts to expose and explore both overt and implicit biases. Thank you very much for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.
Thank you.